All right. Good morning, everybody. We are here today with a special guest, an old friend of Doug's, a guy named Dave Henderson. And Doug, why don't you tell us a little bit about Doug, or about Dave, how you know him, and what he's known for?
Well, Dave is one of my oldest, and I consider him one of my closest friends, even though I never get to see him, because he's in New Zealand, which is absolutely the end of the earth. And I'm very put out with him for staying in New Zealand. Although right now, I guess New Zealand, like Australia, is locked down as tight as a prison camp. So I don't know, where should we start? We have so much to talk about. I mean, everybody wants to hear about New Zealand because that's where all the billionaires are flying to, running away from coming World War. I don't know.
Well, Dave is best. I was looking up, Dave has a Wikipedia page, and I was looking up, and of course it talks about you being a big property developer in New Zealand. That's one of the things that comes up. And it says you're most famous for your battle with the IRS of New Zealand. Like that's what you're most known for, actually.
Sure.
I don't know. We could start there just with your background. I guess you are a property developer in New Zealand.
Sure. No, I'm an entrepreneur property developer in New Zealand, and have been involved in a number of projects, number of property developments, but also for a long period of time, Matt had issues with authority and issues with the state, which if one is a libertarian anywhere in the world, that arises, and particularly in a small country, conservative country like New Zealand, it's exacerbated. So that in the mid 90s, I bought up a number of radio stations. This is going obviously 25 years ago when radio frequencies were pretty scarce, and we put together a network, a few like-minded people and myself, and we called it Radio Liberty. And we broadcast up and down the country. And shortly thereafter, I became the focus of the Inland Revenue Department. I had my house raided by the police. I had all of these issues with them that arose. And it caused me the usual problems that it was intended to cause. But I didn't back off and decided that, I'm going to go the distance with these people, and did go the distance with them. And I was very fortunate that I had a dear friend of mine, Rodney Hyde, who was a newly minted member of our parliament, coincidental with this happening. And Rodney, of course, is he's a tremendous fighter as well. So he got very frustrated with all this. The end result was I got an apology from the Inland Revenue. It's the best you can ever get. They dropped all their claims against me and paid me money they actually owed me. We got a commission, or Rodney got a commission of inquiry going up. The head of the Inland Revenue had to quit. His deputy had to quit. The department was committed to a number of changes. We uncovered some terrible stories, because once my story came out, and it was a big deal, I wrote a book about it, became a bestseller, and all these people came out of the woodwork telling their story about the poor treatment they had had. And there was a number of suicides, for example, where families came out and explained that a father or a husband or whatever had been subject to bankruptcy proceedings. And the ones, interestingly enough, were mostly tradespeople. And the IRD had done as much as, at the end of it, take away their tools. And, for a tradesman, those tools are pretty basic. And so a number of people committed suicide. Terrible story. So for a moment, and trust me, sadly, it's just a brief moment, the department changed its behavior and changed its ways. I was bankrupted.
Well, it sounds just like the US, except that you had a happy ending for a while.
Yeah, that's right. So the only difference with the US would be the length of the happy ending, I guess. So I was bankrupt. I came out of bankruptcy, and a couple of years later, I bought the Inland Revenue's head office in the South Island, New Zealand, the city I live. And we're 500 IRD guys who'd all beaten me up, had to go to work. And I very proudly, the first thing I did when the building was for sale was check to see if the naming rights were available. And so I bought it, and I proudly put a huge sign across it called Henderson House. And for the next 5 years, these miserable pricks had to go to work at Henderson House, which, as you can imagine, was both for me, certainly a very happy ending and a bit of a proud moment. So, and as you observed, I'd written a book called Be Very Afraid, and a production house here in New Zealand bought the rights to it and turned it into a movie, which they filmed, and they had a big premiere for it here in Christchurch, and every time there's a movie premiere, it's filled with government officials who turn up for the opening of an oyster. And so sadly, none of them turned up, but we had a great party. The movie went out there. It was distributed in here, Australia, France, somewhere else. So they did fine with it. So anyway, that was.
I'll just say just a little plug for this movie. I actually bought, in doing research about you this morning, I saw this that was out there, and I actually bought. This is a great thing about the internet, is I bought a digital copy of it. I haven't had a chance to watch it yet today, but the movie is called "We're Here to Help." Right? We're here to help. Yeah,
of course.
And I'm excited to watch it. The trailer is very good.
Oh well, that's fun. Anyway, as you can well imagine, as with anything with the state, and I'm a terribly naive person, Matt, when it comes to lots of things in life. And I imagine that having written a book, having got a commission of inquiry, having had a movie done, everyone would go away and no government department would ever touch me again or bother me again. Well, of course, it's 180 degrees away from that. They all see me as some prize. And so I have had a series of issues, and have them ongoing today, with various agencies of the state, all just wanting to clamor away and have a crack at me. But and some of it's just mad. But look, I used to get, turning up at my office, I would get 1 or 2 people a week who would ring my secretary, ring me, ring my office, and want to come and meet with me. And I would always give them my time, because anyone who's getting beaten up by the state gets my time. And I would be the same story when they left. My secretary would say, was that an IRD, Inland Revenue Department, victim? And I would say, yes, it was. And she could, of course, tell them, because they were beaten, they were downtrodden, their chins were dragging on the ground. And I mean, I used to look at these people and say, there's only one piece of advice I can give you, and that's go the distance. And number one. And two, if you're getting a hiding, enjoy it. Find a way to enjoy it. And but of course, people don't, which is terribly sad. They succumb, they roll over. And a lot of them, and I've seen these people around, some of them who had reasonably significant issues, you see them around, and they're broken for the rest of their lives. So that's what I had to teach myself a number of years ago, if I was going to stay in New Zealand, which I was determined to, that you need to, as Al Swearingen would say, Doug, you need to take your beatings like a man and give some back.
That's right. Dave and I are both huge fans of Deadwood. I think
Everyone should be.
You as well. That show is the best thing that's been done since Shakespeare.
That's right. It was Shakespearean, wasn't it?
It really
Listen,
was.
Dave, I know a lot of our listeners have probably contemplated New Zealand as a boathold in the U.S. So what do you think, speaking as an anarcho-capitalist on the ground in Kiwi land?
Well, sadly, Doug, you're my greatest failure. Because I had imagined that in all your declining years, you'd be sitting up in Auckland, New Zealand, and be available for some intellectual stimulation and motivation for me. But you disappeared, having spent a brief moment here. Look, I live in New Zealand but for two reasons. Obviously, fundamentally, by birth and citizenship, I live here. But I also live here by choice. I mean, it's and everywhere you choose to live has a price, doesn't it, Doug? As you know. And so New Zealand, the upside of New Zealand is, as you observed at the outset here, is it's a tiny little country at the bottom of the planet that, you know, has historically was largely forgotten about, which was delightful. They speak English, which is always a good start. They have a British system of law behind it, which is as good as you can probably get on this planet. And it's aesthetically, it's a very attractive country. Most things are readily available here. So it has all of that going for it. I mean, somewhere, sometime, someone's going to let off a small nuclear device, but it's not going to be in Christchurch or Queenstown. It's going to be somewhere in the Northern Hemisphere, most likely. So it's always appeared to me as a great place to be. I've done business or had businesses in Australia, the US, Canada, excuse me. But I never had the appeal to live there long term. So it's enormously attractive for all of those reasons. But I mean, it's fundamentally a socialist country. It's stocked by serfs out of the UK. So people have this very sort of conservative, servile attitude towards things, which has its ups and downs. Of course, Australia, as you know, was stocked by convicts, so there's a sharp contrast there. Yeah, but it lacks the sophistication of Europe or Manhattan or Paris, but it's got all those peaceful, quiet, remote virtues.
Well, people asked me when I moved to New Zealand, and I was there. Well, more time than you give me credit for, Dave. I was there.
Yeah, you were
4 or 5 years at least.
Oh no, more probably.
More maybe, yeah. And people ask me, well, why did you come to New Zealand? And I told them, for the kangaroos. And of course they said, well, wait a minute, there's no kangaroos in New Zealand. And then of course I once again digging back into Casablanca, where I said, well, I was misinformed. Actually, I came there for the polo, because when I first came to New Zealand, well, not the first time, but to move there, it was the cheapest country that was civilized in the world. The Kiwi dollar was like 37 cents or something like that. Prices were depressed. I mean, it was everything was free in New Zealand, including the polo.
Well, I remember I assisted you, and it would be 2000, maybe 2001, buying 3 kilometers of coastline. And this is at Areri, and you were buying that, and I think the Kiwi dollar was 35 or 36 cents when you bought that, and that was a stunning property. You know, that was gorgeous.
That was a pretty good real estate score, but I think I think everything's pretty expensive in New Zealand now, wouldn't you say?
Well, yeah. Look, and it's all relative, isn't it? And I'm not sure what prices are in other parts of the world that I've previously tracked, because I haven't looked for a long time. But there's still some stunning places, Doug, that are just well-kept secrets in New Zealand. You know, the west coast of the South Island of New Zealand, you know, you can still buy a coastal property there for, say, $200,000 US, you know, and with a house and a decent block of land. I mean, and it's a gorgeous part of the world. Again, it's remote, it's charming, it's geographically stunning. So the jewels, which are places like we were talking about, the place that you originally got 20 odd years ago, they're all been well picked over, and often mostly picked over, funnily enough, by foreigners coming into New Zealand to seek residency or whatever. Places like Queenstown, which for your listeners here, viewers here, is an aspen, isn't it? You know, and you know it well, and gorgeous part of the world. And as you reflected on, the number of enormously wealthy Americans that are coming in there and have been coming in there and buying significant properties is extraordinary. And I mean, it's nothing like Aspen Airport, but you can see at times, certainly pre-pandemic, you can see at times, you know, 6 or 8 sizable private jets parked up on the tarmac there. So,
So what, so if somebody moves to New Zealand now, how much, if you're a libertarian, how much of a problem is your communist prime minister going to be?
I think that if you handle it properly, I think you'll be fine. And you know, yeah. So from a residency point of view, you're talking about, and ultimately citizenship. Is that what you're thinking, Doug?
Perhaps, yeah, both.
You can still do all that. You can still do all that and make that happen. Excuse me. And there's meaningful exemptions, funnily enough, that exist where, and I can't tell you the thresholds. I've been trying to help someone recently, a woman immigrate from the UK, and but you know, for about 3 million Kiwi, so a couple of million US, you can, if you're willing to invest that into this country, there's a fast track process that you can engage with to get you in here.
Okay, well, I'll keep that in mind because I almost became a Kiwi citizen, but
you came very close.
Well, I got caught up in the tax system with having your assets in a trust and all this type of thing, so I never did it.
Yeah. And then you refused to take those Maori language courses, didn't you, if I remember right? So, yeah, but, and look, the other thing I should add about New Zealand, just for what it's worth, Matt, is that comparatively, it's benign. I mean, I don't doubt that if I had the dust-ups with the state that I've had over the last 20 or 30 years, I'd be rotting somewhere in an American jail somewhere, you know, but that doesn't happen here and can't happen here. And, you know, you get away with a lot of pushback here, as you should, of course, in a proper and healthy society. But, you know, most jurisdictions in the world, they would find a way to incarcerate you eternally.
Listen, is it true? Because I don't believe anything I read in the press. Is it true that Australians cannot leave Australia at this moment? Do you know?
That's right. That's entirely right, Dave. Yeah, no, as of I think a few days ago, Australia went into a complete lockdown. New Zealand's no different, of course. I mean, what's going on here is just appalling. And I mean, you and I have a poor view of man, and for very good reason. But you know, that's been exacerbated dramatically. You know, New Zealanders can leave the country if you can find a flight, and if you're a New Zealand citizen wanting to come back in, you have to make arrangements with the state from wherever you're sitting to book into what they call a managed isolation quarantine facility, which is a hotel that's converted to such a facility, and you have to make a booking, and you're booked in there for 2 weeks. And so, funnily enough, I don't know if you can remember where I have my apartment right in the center of Christchurch. I'm in a hotel building here, and the hotel next door is one such facility, and it is quite surreal because they've erected fences, wire fences all around this hotel, and they've created a compound which looks eerily similar to sort of a Guantanamo Bay compound with scrim all over the fences. And if you take the time to peer through the scrim or a hole in the scrim, you can see people with masks on walking around several meters distance from the next person, and they get an hour a day to come out of their hotel room and wander around. And then they go back in, and they sit in their hotel room, God knows what, and they're there for 2 weeks.
Good God.
And I tell you,
even if you have your own place of your own house, they make you go there?
Of course. No, of course. It's worse than that, Doug. You can't choose which one to go to. So if you were coming into New Zealand as a resident, for example, there'd be an asterisk beside your name already, as we know, and they would find the dirtiest, scummiest, horrible hotel somewhere where they would put you for the next 2 weeks. And, you know, it is appalling. And, you know, the whole thing has been a wonderful sociological study you know, as to the attitudes of people, both obviously all the locals, as we went into this mad lockdown, and then and we persist with it. I mean, this is, what are we now? We're 15 months, 16 months with our borders fundamentally closed. We're North Korea.
That's just amazing.
But
And I mean, this, sorry,
big
man.
success. New Zealand is held up as the one of the greatest successes on earth.
I know, and I see that in the international media, and it's appalling, because it's one of the greatest failures, for the simple reason is that the populists have sat down, to quote Doug, like whipped dogs, and just taken this, and everyone's very excited about our Prime Minister because she, quote, has saved us, and that is, for a large swath of the population, that's a prevailing view, is that she saved us. And this notion that we're supposed to wipe out a virus is, particularly in an environment where we're supposed to be saving species all around the planet. I don't know why we're trying to eradicate one, but yeah, as we all know, you can't eradicate a virus. And so there's a bit of theatre going on here, which, if one takes the right attitude, is fun to watch it play out, the madness of it. But this government will go down in the fullness of time as probably the worst New Zealand government ever, in part because of this, but in part because of all their other financial madness, including 100 billion of quantitative easing, and in the last 12 months. And, you know, we're a country of 5 million people. So what's that? That's South Carolina or something like that, isn't it? You know, the state of South Carolina, we've had 100 billion of quantitative easing. That's per head. That's worse than what the Fed is doing. So that is going to cause major issues, and rampant inflation, and real assets are going to go up in value dramatically. And again, it's going to be the lower socioeconomic folk who are going to get smacked around by it all. So anyway, I just think if I've answered Doug's question about,
and you aren't, Dave, thank God. But I got to ask you, do you still have land or whatever in Vanuatu? Because we were up there a couple times together.
we did. No, in the end, we had all those options on that land in Portavana, which is, remember, Portavana was the one over from Port Vila, which is the main town in Ifati, the main island there. And that's where the Americans, of course, had their base in World War II. It was a much more attractive base than Port Vila. No, I gave that away. That was hilarious. That was so much fun, wasn't it?
We had so much fun there dealing with the big numbers and the small numbers and the John from Cargo cult still exists to this day.
The Nakamals. Just as a really quick anecdote, of course, is in dealing with that land, and we have the most convoluted planning processes in New Zealand, where literally in some jurisdictions, if you're wanting to paint your garage door, you can spend a year going through hearing processes to get the approvals. And I remember we were doing that land in Vanuatu, and I had to go and meet the planning official. And we met in a Nakamal. So you're sitting on literally almost on a bit of 4x2, in a shelter with a tin roof with the rain pissing down on it. And you're drinking this most disgusting kava, aren't you? That someone they'd have a baby bath, wouldn't they, full of kava, and they'd have an old cup, they're pouring it into a coconut shell for you. And you're sitting there drinking this. And I met the planning official. And he looked at me and said, "Okay, well, what do you want to do?" And I said, "Oh, well, we want to put some beachside villas in. Yeah, that'll be okay. And then we'll put some condominiums in. Yeah, that'll be okay. And we'll have some commercial. Yeah. And and then what else? Oh, we'll have some factories because we've got some work to do and some agriculture. Yeah, no, that'll be fine." And I'm sitting there thinking, this is hilarious. Then he said, "Is there anything else you want?" And I said, "You know what? We want a casino license and a banking license." And he stopped and looked up and said, "Yeah, no, we can do that too." And I said, "Great." And we shook hands and he left. And I had a guy who worked for me with me, and he looked at me and said, God, that was easy. And I said, you know what it was, but I still feel aggrieved that I had to ask, you know. So,
That's right, of course.
so anyway, that was Vanuatu. But the answer, Doug, sorry, it was a long-winded answer. It's no, I don't. And I've been up there for a number of years, but it had so much promise and potential of, didn't it? And we always decided it was a stable place because I think there were 147 different dialects up there, and no one was ever going to be able to muster enough agreement or cooperation to ever dominate the parliament there. So,
well, you remember on the island of Espiritu Santo, that giant 20 was it 10,000 hectare farm?
Yes.
10,000 head of cattle,
yes.
a cocoa plantation, coffee plantation, and I think it was a cocoa plantation. We could have gotten like a 50-year lease on that for like $2 or $3 million. Was that
and
right?
it had its own abattoir, if you'll remember.
It did.
And the beef in Vanuatu was highly prized, of course. Most of it was being exported up to Japan. I mean, it's nowhere near as good as Wagyu or the Kobe Japanese beef, but because it was very lean, but it was very, very tender. And of course, they just had so much grass, and they never sprayed any pesticides or anything on it. So it was entirely organic. So
I wonder what happened to it, because it was something like 20 miles of bush in front we could have gotten.
Yeah, no, we could have, and you're right. I followed it up, funnily enough, just as a matter of curiosity, a couple of years ago, and it sold to an Australian syndicate, and they were happily sitting up there with all of that, and it had a lot of beachfront, and no, that was a stunning property to have had.
It was, but we would have had to have moved up there, otherwise, natives going about it would have everything would have disappeared after a while.
And you would have wanted to be the governor of Espiritu Santo, and there would have been issues with that, and you know,
it would have wound up something like in that movie with Sean Connery and Michael Caine, The Man Who Would Be King, in the end.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, exactly. No, that was delightful. They were great. Vanuatu was a great venue.
Are there any deals like that anywhere in the world anymore? Like these, I've heard about several of these deals you've done in the past, Doug, but are they gone for now at least?
Good question. You know, you'll recall when we were talking last week, Dave, we were talking last week, and I reminisced about how I almost went to the Solomon Islands, which is, you know, like a standard deviation or two more primitive than Vanuatu with John McAfee. And I'm sure.
I remember you invited me.
I'm sure I did.
Yeah,
I was going to make Mr. Toad's Wild Ride in the South Pacific. You know, that's right. Matt would have come. I was also going to invite PJ O'Rourke and James Altucher, and it would have been wild and crazy, I promise you, with all of us there interviewing Solomon Islands high government officials. But I'm sure that you can go to all over those South Pacific Islands and get fantastic things very, very cheap, even though it's probably all leasehold as opposed to freehold.
Yes. No, leasehold is the only hitch, if you like. But I think, Matt, that there is those opportunities out there across the South Pacific Islands. Fiji, of course, as you know, is just a massive of islands and opportunity like that. Vanuatu, Doug, there'll still be huge deals there, you know. And I don't know the Solomons at all. I've never been there, or New Caledonia. I've never been there, but and obviously New Caledonia is a lot more sophisticated than probably any of them because of the French influence, continued French influence in there. But Fiji, Matt, you'd find opportunities in Fiji right now where very affordable, big chunks of beachfront and if not whole islands. But as Doug suggests, the only caveat would be you would have to enter into a 50 to 100 year lease, which probably doesn't bother any of us right now.
No, and I mean the bottom line is you don't really own. Well, at least as an American, I'm not used to actually owning real estate anyway, because the property taxes, are due every quarter, and even if you feel like you own that property, the state will remind you very quickly that for next to nothing they can have it from you if you fail to pay the taxes.
Indeed, indeed. And places like Fiji are a tad unstable in that respect, but I don't think they're so uncivilized that you would have major issues. But no, the opportunities are there.
What are you doing you've done so much development in New Zealand? Are you still doing property development there now, or what are you spending your time doing?
No, the city I'm in right now is Christchurch, which is well known for two recent things. One, a major earthquake in 2011 that really smashed the city up. Yeah. Secondly, for a killing of 51 people at two mosques 2 years ago. And the earthquake has, as I explained to Doug, who has been to the city several times, but the central government decided to intervene in the repairs of the city after the earthquake to speed things up. And of course, inevitably, that slowed things down dramatically. And so it's taken much longer than anyone ever anticipated. But it's coming back, and we have property here that we're still doing. And in particular in Queenstown, we have several chunks of land down there that we're developing or in various stages. And Queenstown is an environment that's very tough to develop in. I assume, much like Aspen, in that respect, is that you've got a local authority that you've got to work through, and everyone is so precious about everything.
It's so hard. It's so expensive,
isn't it?
Listen, if people wanted to use New Zealand as a bolt hole, it's got its pluses and minuses, but would you recommend that, or what's your general feeling? Can you think of a better place or someplace?
Well, Doug, you've got a better view of that, way better view of that than I ever will have, because of your experiences, contacts, and all your travel. But I would recommend it, despite all its shortcomings, primarily because of the fact that it is remote, it is isolated, it is stable. It's got that decent veneer of civilization anyway, and it's still not exorbitant. It's still not silly pricing. So, for someone who and things like, which I know are important, particularly for American colleagues, I've observed, is it has pretty sophisticated medical facilities here now. So all of that is readily available. It can be a very peaceful and gorgeous place to be. And if you're here and you're doing a limited amount of business, then you'll be left alone. You probably shouldn't be seeing the coffee shop with me, but you'll otherwise be left alone. And but someone, for a lot of people, like I'm imagining your audience, Doug, who might have a significant investment portfolio, of course you can manage that from here as readily as you can from anywhere in the world today, can't you? So yeah, I'd recommend it.
Yeah, it does make sense, and it's a pretty non-corrupt country. I mean,
sure, which is unfortunate in many ways.
It's a double-edged sword. It really is. I mean, I'm all for corruption.
There's lots of problems. You'd like to settle for $1,000 in an envelope, wouldn't you?
Exactly.
It would be a lot better than dragging it out for years. But no, it's. I mean, its corruption is a corruption in philosophy, if you like, or a corruption in attitudes, which you're going to get anywhere. But it's not corrupt in that you're on edge the whole time, that you're going to be a victim of that corruption.
Well, one of the problems with New Zealand is there are not a lot of libertarians, and certainly not a lot of anarcho-capitalists per capita. And that would still be the case, I'm sure. No.
Well, as you know, the percentage dropped dramatically when you left, Doug. So It's not. I could count on, certainly on both hands, probably on one, the number of fellow travelers that you and I would have here, because you know, the people will subscribe to a degree and then they start falling off pretty quick the more deeper philosophically one goes. So no, it's bereft of that, though there is a political party here that historically one would have labeled a libertarian party. I mean, my dear friend Rodney Hyde, who I mentioned earlier, was the leader of that political party. It's called ACT, A-C-T, and he was the leader of that party for many years, member of parliament. He was a member of cabinet for a while and would have been the first libertarian member of cabinet in the history of this country, which is still a big deal. He quit politics as much as with my urging as anything, and he and that party is strong today. And you know, I know the folk in there very well, and you know, they acquiesce somewhat, but they're pretty sound, and they will start having more and more of an influence on, you know, and input on some of these issues. But it's pretty limited, as it is anywhere in the world, Doug.
I think that's true anywhere in the world. This is the problem. Anywhere,
Yeah.
it's fine. But I think your prime minister has scared a lot of people like us away from New Zealand. Just some of her statements, you know, even talking about you know, vaccines, and how, like, you know, the people who worked within certain fields like all had no choice but to be vaccinated, and that kind of thing. You know, really never like to see that. But I don't know. I mean, how does it actually feel being there? I mean, are you actually able to do what you want to do? I mean, it's been widely open for the most part during this lockdown period, right?
It has. Matt, I would say my life hasn't changed in any way, or I've made sure I haven't allowed myself to be inconvenienced in any way, which takes a wee bit of effort. But other than the fact that, you know, one can't leave the country and come back in without spending 2 weeks in home detention or worse. But and I've other than to go and see Doug in Buenos Aires, which was the only trip I had ever aspired to in recent times, I have no grand aspirations to travel. So to that end, it hasn't inconvenienced me either. But she does scare people with that. But I think you'll find that there's an ever-growing amount of pushback on that, which is inevitable, because people do want to travel and they can't, and they're starting to build pushback. It's the old story, always for the wrong reasons. I mean, as you and I know, the pushback should be there is because personal freedom, personal responsibility is the highest value, and we shouldn't have any of these constraints on us. But slowly they're getting more and more pissed off, and they are pushing back a bit. So I've got this hail on the roof. I hope that's not screwing up our sound, is it?
No, it's fine.
Look, the Prime Minister is
still in that fantastic penthouse you had that in Christchurch. Oh, good. I'm glad it withstood, because we were afraid. Yeah.
I was out of it for 3 years after the earthquake. It took 3 years to repair this building, but so I was out of it and happily lived a very ascetic existence. But you know, I am out of it, and I travel between here and Queenstown every week. So it's from that point of view, it's a wonderful life. It's sensational. So, but look, our Prime Minister, Matt, she has one skill, is that she can affect empathy. And it's been an extraordinary study as to how effective she's been with that. You know, we had that mosque shooting, which just opened the doors to her, where she came down to Christchurch and she had this great line where she said, "They are us." And up it went in billboards all over town, and she had the hijab on and embraced these people, and everyone's, well, not everyone, but a large portion of the population sit back and applaud about what a wonderful, kind, empathetic woman. And empathy has high currency, doesn't it? You know,
it's even George Bush standing on the rubble of 9/11. Now at that moment, everyone was like, "Oh yeah, he's on."
There you go.
Yeah, it was
yeah, no, that bought him a lot of slack in terms of all of the wars he started and so forth. So, and then we've had, and what you've seen since then is it's inevitable. There's always problems, aren't there? We had a volcanic explosion on an island that knocked some tourists around. She's there the next day, you know, and she is empathetic. We had floods in the area around the city I'm in now 4 weeks ago, and she's down here, and we're going to give $4 million immediate relief to farmers, and she's empathetic, and she's touring, and she has this great empathetic face, and so everyone is thinking how wonderful it is, and you know how feminine. It's great having a feminine approach to politics, which is this
somebody who cares,
someone who cares, and so this notion, as you observed, that international media have picked up on and are promoting that. How she saved the New Zealanders. I mean, she hasn't saved a soul. I mean, it's just appalling. I mean, here's a statistic. In quarantine, when you come into the country and you're 2 weeks in your quarantine, you get tested regularly every day or whatever for the virus. And we've had over 2,000 cases now of people coming into the country, going into isolation and being tested positive. Not one of those has died. Not one of those has died, and I think only one of them have been to hospital. So, I mean, there's a little snapshot of the virus and the fatality connected to it. You know, so look, I mean, I don't want to go into that because I'm sure you guys have covered this significantly, but I mean, it's a bad flu season, you know, and the response has just been so disproportionate, and you see we have a thing called QR codes that every hospitality venue has to put up on its front door, and you're supposed to download the app. And I think last time I looked, there was 500,000 New Zealanders had downloaded the app, which is terribly disappointing that there's even that many who are up for it. And I watch adults, grown men go up with their phones and they holding it up to the app because they're going in to get a cup of coffee, you know. Yeah. And you just realize these people have lost all sense of personal responsibility and all sense of personal freedom for sure. So,
well, they're probably not going to force you to take whatever vaccination they have there because you're not flying internationally much.
No, I've got no interest in the vaccine, Doug, right now. I couldn't care if I got that virus tomorrow because I'm comfortable with where I'm at from a health perspective. And I have, before I take the vaccine, I'd want to understand and know about the vaccine. I haven't even bothered drilling into it. I obviously read a number of stories, and the type of media I read will carry stories about, you know, vaccine side effects and consequences and so forth. But I haven't drilled into it. I don't understand it. And at the moment, I have no interest whatsoever in being vaccinated. But just something Matt was mentioning is I don't think it will be, they just don't have a prayer of making it compulsory, Matt. And the statistics I see, and these may be universal, is that about, you know, there's a solid 20% of the population who will absolutely refuse to be vaccinated, and there's possibly another 20 who will take some convincing.
Yeah, I think it's the same here in the U.S. too. There's a hardcore contingent that are just like, no chance. There's no chance whatsoever. But you know, I don't know. The way the U.S. does everything, it's all through incentives. You know, so they make the population more dependent on you, and then the government offers these little treats if you'll just go, you know, cooperate with them. It seems to be pretty effective actually at wearing people down.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? No, that's so disappointing, isn't it?
Really is.
But predictable.
What do you make of the fact that this has been global though? This whole COVID response has been like basically the same everywhere. You know, people have handled it a little bit differently, but than other places. But basically everywhere.
Well, we probably shouldn't be surprised, should we? Because, you know, to the extent that we understand people's philosophy, people's personal philosophies, you know, the sad reality is, as New Zealand reflects magnificently, is, you know, that people value security over freedom, don't they? Yeah. And that was what you observed in New Zealand. Everyone rushed to embrace the state's offered security. It was something with open arms, and you know, you get that they don't have a decent understanding of personal responsibility. You know, so if someone's saying, well, you can come into my shelter here and we'll look after you, they're running in there, and it's appalling. You know, we all know that nothing can trump personal freedom, and that's where this matter should have started and finished. Is that, okay, there's a virus there, you should be careful. You know, here's what we know about it. Here's the age groups or health conditions that it most affects. If you think you fall into that category, then, you know, I got a 98-year-old mother, and I mean, we made sure that she was well looked after and she was safe. But beyond that, I couldn't care. I mean, I'm not worried in the slightest about it. The universality of it, I would suggest, comes from that universal approach that security is more important than freedom, and so, you know, it can go out the door for a moment while we deal with this problem. And look, I probably have a similar view to Doug to the whole concept of conspiracy, and, you know, and the greatest conspiracy that we've ever seen will always see is a conspiracy against personal responsibility, isn't it? Anytime the state can take responsibility away from people, it does so, because that's the path to power. And so, you know, all of these jurisdictions just saw it as an opportunity where they could, you know, seize more power, take away more liberties, and enforce more control, and they have done so.
They have, but there's the whole, you know, power grab of governments, but then there's the economic consequences of what's done. And you were talking about the quantitative easing that they've done even in New Zealand. And you know, as a developer, you must be very how the economy is doing must so directly affect every part of all of your work, your whole life, I imagine. So I imagine you think about these things a lot. I mean, what do you think are the repercussions of or when is our comeuppance with all these economic decisions?
Well, it's going to happen in New Zealand. You know, unquestionably, we've increased our debt levels. Our debt levels were very low. New Zealand worked very hard through the late 80s and 90s to reduce state debt, and we had it down to about 30% of GDP, which is relative to America is pretty impressive. But that's now blown out as well, as a consequence of the last 12 months or so. And so that's going to have a long-term impact. Look, I'm not I don't have a decent handle, or I'm not a financial analyst in the way that you and Doug are. But you know, I mean, the value of property, for example, is going to go up. It's an inevitability. There'll be significant inflationary pressures, which we've all seen in the past, and that will reflect. And you know, and the poor schmuck who's been saving to buy a house for him and his wife and two kids, and who thought he was getting somewhere, is going to watch the price of those houses, you know, over the next 5 years, maybe a little bit longer, double. And he's going to be more excluded from the marketplace, you know, which is outrageous. And the value of land and appropriate places is going to rise significantly. Funnily enough, it already has. And I've been surprised at how buoyant this economy has been. But it's the government who's discovered that they can borrow, because we have low levels of state borrowing, and they can print money. And they've embraced both and started doling it out. So the consequences of that are going to be dire. But you know, the madness is things like they gave the media $50 million Now, 50 million, that doesn't sound like a lot of money, but if you're a media organization, and the mainstream media in New Zealand has been struggling and is struggling the same way that mainstream medias around the world are. And so these people can now queue up and take a handout from the state, which is appalling, isn't it? And I mean, no media organization with integrity would ever dream of such a proposition, because no matter how much you might protest otherwise, you are now tied to the state, indebted to the state, aren't you? And you're going to be gentle on them. And I mean, and I can quote you, it just got to a point where billions of dollars were being handed out to people to stay at home. You know, we just had this madness where a traveller from Australia came to Wellington, another our capital city in New Zealand, and he was found to be infected as he wandered around here. And so immediately they moved that city to what they call level 2. I just appalled by these concepts. And they then go and do a deep clean of every place he ever went to. And then they immediately say, because you've gone to level 2, which means you can't have more than 10 people congregating. I can't remember what the rules are, Matt. But then if you feel you're affected, you immediately apply to the government, and they will give you some form of handout to compensate you for these consequences, you know. And I mean, where does it all come from? It's paying people, as we know, to be unproductive.
Well, nobody recognizes that the state is not their friend, it's their enemy. They all think it's their friend.
They do. Yeah, that's the basic, isn't it? You know.
What we need, Dave, is a serious crackdown from the Internal Revenue Service, where it can tag every citizen and teach them a lesson good and hard.
That's right. Well, and I mean, they can't get every citizen. So, I mean, we could do it like we used to ballot for the compulsory military training or something, shouldn't we, Doug? And they used to do in New Zealand, they'd ballot it by birth. When you hit 21, you went into a ballot, and if your name got pulled out, you had to go into the army. I mean, we should do ballots, and every week pull people out and give them a serious horsewhipping and auditing, and hold them up as an example of why we need to be more compliant. So, but yeah. You always promise me a revolution, and
so far it's just in my dreams, Dave. But I've got to get back to New Zealand just so we can sit down and have some cigars and
you bet,
drink some scotch and just talk about how the world is going to hell in a handbasket.
We did last time. I was reflecting that I think I saw you. We were smoking cigars at your place in Auckland, but we were lighting them with Zimbabwe $100 trillion notes.
We shouldn't have done that, because those are worth about $5 or $10 a piece now.
They're a collector's item. I know. Fortunately, I do still have some, but we may be lighting them with $100 trillion US dollars or something in the not too distant future. So
yeah, something wicked this way comes. And I'm wondering if I'll bet if you did a development, well, something like I did in Argentina, which turned out to be a financial disaster for me, but I've recovered from it okay. I wonder if you did something like that in New Zealand, I'll bet there'd be a big market from Americans and Canadians for it.
No, you and I had always talked and skirted around that proposition. And, I mean, if there weren't governments, as you and I know, what would happen is there would be communities of interest, wouldn't there? Where whole communities would spring up, which would be governed by their own internal rules, and they would be communities of interest. And obviously, philosophy is a core sphere where that community of interest can arise. And it's a wonderful notion, and I would love to do it in New Zealand. And you and I, to be fair, have talked about that from time to time, how we should do it. Look, I've never visited your development in Argentina, but I have to take my hat off to you, you know, from everything I've seen. I know what it takes to create something like that, Doug. And you guys did a huge job on that. So
it's but it's a nightmare being a developer, but you do that well and know how to. You remember the first thing we were talking about in New Zealand, what was that place that had grass growing on it for the roofs, you know? Remember that place?
Oh, yeah.
Went?
That was hilarious. You know, that was a good example. That was many years ago in the early 70s. That was developed by a very wealthy American who came out here with the idea that he wanted to hide away from Armageddon, and he developed that. But that was down further south of Queenstown, and again, it's just the most beautiful part of the world. I don't know. You and I drove to that lodge and we had a good look at it, but I don't know what became of it. I thought about it the other day for some reason. I can't tell you what became of it, but yeah. But there is blocks. There's little valleys that you can get, and you can build a little Gov't gulch, and the technology, of course, makes all of that even more possible today, doesn't it? Than perhaps it's ever been. So, but I look, if I do it, would you come?
Yeah. If you build, I will come.
All right. And Mac, you're there too?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds great. Honestly, I've only ever been to Auckland for about 48 hours one time. That's my only experience in New Zealand at all. So which is like not really being there at all, frankly, from what I understand.
Yeah, it is. No, quite that. So
we should do that. It's only an 8-hour flight from Montevideo or Buenos Aires, so it's not as far as it might be.
Yeah. No, indeed. Yeah.
Well, I'm an Iowa boy, so that yes, if you build it, they will come. It's something I understand. Oh.
Great. All right. Okay.
We can keep it in mind and maybe take it seriously. I mean,
well, watch this space then, Doug. I will. We'll plan something. Okay.
All right. I mean, let's have some fun. I mean, I don't know if we'll make any money, but we'll have some fun.
We will.
Dave, is there anywhere people can like? Do you have a social media presence or anything? If people wanted to. Yeah,
no, I have no social media presence, fortunately. I can give you a email address if anyone watching this wants to, if I can be of any help to them, or if they're getting beaten up by the IRS, Matt, I can give them some words of encouragement. No, I can absolutely give you that. So
if you just send me the email you'd like me to use, I can put it in the description so people can contact you if they.
You bet. I'll send you that. No, I'm very, very comfortable about doing that. So that's cool.
Well, good. Well, I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you being here. Doug has talked so fondly of you for the 15 years I've known him. So it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person.
Well, he's been a very dear friend of mine. So thank you, Matt, and best of luck with this series, and good on you for doing it. So the more of these overviews that go out, the better, I guess.
I think so too. That's the goal. Until Doug becomes an official enemy of the state, anyway. In which case, we'll clearly have to stop. But until then, we'll keep doing them.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Matt. Hey, Doug. Great to see you.
Thanks, Dave. You too. And we'll